Well, Vogue Business is doing a deep dive into your favorite beauty brands and how they handle everything from sustainability practices to brand awareness as companies navigate difficult macro headwinds. Now, The Ordinary emerged as the top performing brand for the index in 2023, with Charlotte Tilbury and Kiehl's coming in close behind. For more on this report, I'm joined by Anusha Couttigane, Vogue Business Head of Advisory. Thank you for joining me this morning. So, this is a very interesting index because when you look at what it covered, consumer, digital, ESG, and innovation, how did The Ordinary end up topping this list?
Hi, Rochelle. Well, yeah, it's a really interesting result. One of the things that we've seen consumers expressing more concern over is the economic situation that they're facing. Everyone is starting to face off to that cost of living crisis. And the research that we conducted in 6 markets shows that globally, 35% of consumers say that if prices continue to increase, they're likely to cut back the frequency of their spend on beauty. And 30% of those global consumers say that they might actually switch to less expensive products. So actually, there's a really good reason why The Ordinary has emerged on top. It's a brand that consumers love. It's a brand that consumers see the value of, both in terms of the product efficacy and the value of the product. And it's a brand that's going to remain really resilient in that economic situation. But there are other reasons. As you mentioned, we cover ESG and innovation as part of this study too. And one of the things that we've identified with some of the top performing brands, including The Ordinary, is their commitment to sustainability, not just as a business, but how they're making that accessible to consumers as well. So, for example, by providing really clear guidelines on how consumers can deal with those products at the end of their life cycle, how they can recycle the products, how they can make sure that they're adhering to the rules and regulations in their local markets. And by making that information really accessible to consumers in a very convenient way, it's enhancing the experience that consumers receive from these brands as well, and making sustainability a reality for them.
That's interesting because you have The Ordinary in there, but the other brands that are in there, those are usually pretty quite high price points. What sort of pullback have you been seeing from luxury buyers versus those who are more budget conscious?
Well, I don't think that the pullback has actually fully manifested yet. I think it's something that brands should be readying themselves for. But one of the other things that we've seen with brands that operate in more of a prestige space is that there's real brand love for them. When we compare the beauty industry to the fashion industry, particularly at the luxury end of the market, most brands that people are familiar with in the luxury space have been around for a long time. We're talking about heritage brands that have a history of between 50 and 100 years typically. When we look at the brands that we've studied in the index, actually the majority of those brands haven't been around for that long. Only 4 of the brands that we studied had been around for over 30 years. 40% of the brands are less than 10 years old. So for some of those brands that operate at the luxury end of the market, there is real brand love for them because they've had a longer history, they've had time to build that trust with consumers. And we can see that with brands like Kiehl's and NARS, for example, there is a true brand love and trust there that's exhibited by consumers. There are also differences between the markets. So we look at 6 markets, and we can see that some of the Western markets like the US, UK, Italy, and France are already starting to experience some of those economic headwinds. But when we look at markets like the Middle East and China, they remain the most frequent purchasers of beauty products. And actually, they don't have an intention of changing the way that they spend, even if products become more expensive.
So, Anusha, what are we seeing in terms of spending now, even within the sort of subsections of beauty? Because we know during the pandemic, when we're in lockdown, people focus a lot more on skincare. What are they spending money on now that we're at this point?
Well, we're seeing that skincare has remained a really resilient category. And surprisingly, you would normally think that that's a category that appeals to a specific demographic, so particularly more mature women, but actually there's real interest across all age groups. And we're also seeing more interest from male consumers. So 20% of the respondents to our survey were male consumers. And we see that there's a real interest in skincare categories. But what's also interesting is that the brands that tend to appeal to male consumers of beauty and skincare tend to perform better if they're gender neutral rather than brands that have a specific range for men. So we're tending to find that those brands that appeal to all demographics, that are neutral in their target audience, have more of a resonance with male consumers than the brands that are specifically targeting them.
And Anusha, I wanted to ask, how do you break through the noise in this sort of environment when you do have so many people competing for your consumer dollars, and then you also have, AI innovations. You have celebrities like Rihanna being the face of Fenty. How do you break through the noise, and where do you see the key disruptors being from here?
That's a really good question and a difficult question to answer, actually. I think there are a couple of different ways that brands can take advantage of some of the opportunities when it comes to generating that noise and awareness. If I take Charlotte Tilbury, which was one of the top performers in the index, one of the things that they've been doing is investing in digital innovation. So tools like AR and VR for virtual try-on of products, but also creating virtual environments where digitally native audiences can engage with them. They've had a collaboration with Disney to create a virtual store that delivers a really immersive experience. And that has helped them to stand out both to those audience, but also stand out in the very competitive digital environment where many of these beauty brands have actually thrived. In Chinese social media, there's a real opportunity as well. It's become very expensive for brands to compete in Western social media. And so actually Chinese platforms like Xiaohongshu and Douyin offer an opportunity to reach new audiences and audiences that actually have an intention of spending more as well.